Welcome to Keiser Voices, the story of success, brought to you by Keiser University Graduate School, here where the academic world meets personal triumph. Join us today as we dive into the captivating tales of success.
Welcome back, everyone, to another great episode here at Keiser Voices. This month and all month long, we are taking a moment to talk about and feature our exercise and sports science programs here at Keiser University. And with that brings a bunch of different elements that we want to bring to the table for you all, from tips for health, even to continue our conversation about nutrition and just bringing awareness to a lot of the subjects and conversations that our own students are having within this discipline. So joining us today as we talk about obesity and physical activity, and we take a look at breaking down barriers to a healthier lifestyle, we have with us Guilherme Artioli. He is a research associate, faculty of medicine at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. We have Dr. Stefane Dias, who is our academic program director for the Masters in Exercise and Sports Science program with the graduate school. And he also has some experience with being a sports performance coach. And lastly, but certainly not least, Dr. Dalton Oliver, who is the program director for the undergraduate online exercise science program. And I should point out, as we go into this conversation, so you guys all have a bit of a background on our guest today, that Dr. Diaz and Dr. Oliver are also both certified in sports nutrition. And you will see as the conversation goes on that that's going to play an important part of our conversation. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. I had a bunch of accolades I wanted to recognize you guys for, because we're super excited to have all three of you with us.
Nice. Very good. So I want to just say thank you for Heather, Adriana, all Keiser faculty and staff to let us join and make those podcasts. We're going to make like a series of podcasts. And then here, a colleague of mine, Guilherme Artioli from Brazil. He also worked in England, so he has a lot of experience, a lot of publications. So it's a pleasure to have him here and then let him share some of this knowledge with us. And then my colleague, Dalton, we work together, and then we have some projects together. And then Dalton's going to talk about that later. So let's get started. Thank you.
Yeah, and not to exclude Dr. Oliver and Dr. Diaz, but I'd really like to start off with Dr. Artioli, because I don't always get to have a conversation with him. So feel free, gentlemen, to chime in. But Dr. Artioli, what is the definition of obesity? And then what are some issues that we have with the classification? I think that's an important place to start this conversation.
Yes, definitely. So before anything else, just wanted to thank you, the hosters and Keiser University, for the invitation. Heather, yes, I think this is a very important starting point. It looks like a very simple question, but I think this is where all the confusion about obesity starts. Because by definition, obesity is the excess of body fat. But because, if you have too much body fat in your body, that can bring some negative impact to the function, to the functionality, to the what we call the homeostasis. So some parts of the body stops working properly. But the thing is how to classify, like in real life. Because when it comes to epidemiological studies, what the scientists use is the BMI, the body mass index, which is very easy to measure and very easy to calculate. So it is very convenient to use that as from the epidemiological perspective. But in clinical practice, this is not a very useful measure, because body mass index uses only body mass and stature, like your height. So it brings no information whatsoever on the body composition and the amount of body fat. So I think this is already a problem in the diagnosis of obesity.
So then, what are the risks associated with obesity, regardless of the classification that we're talking about?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
What are the risks of obesity, regardless of the classification method being used?
So yeah, obesity brings a number of different risks. We can talk about the all-cause mortality risk, which is like the combined risk of all comorbidities that comes along with obesity. So there is like what we call the J curve. So the higher the BMI, the higher the risk for mortality, regardless of the cause. And you can also break down these all-cause mortality into specific causes of mortality. So obesity increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, increases the risk of metabolic diseases. It increases the risk of certain types of cancer. And we can keep going and on for a long time to point out all the risks involved with obesity.
So I have a few questions, and I'm trying to figure out which one I want to go to first based on what you were just explaining. And again, Dr. Oliver and Dr. Dias, feel free to jump in if you want to add on to our conversation. Yes, sir.
Yes, so just to complement a little bit about BMI. So BMI is very simple, but also too basic, because when you use this calculation, of course, for let's say a CDC or World Health Organization is a number that they can work with, but then doesn't take in consideration, for example, the bone mineral density, the lean body mass. So this sometimes end up being like a little problematic when you use just the height and the weight in simple terms. So definitely we can talk more later. Guilherme, I think also going to mention that a little bit, but that's why we insist and we enforce, especially like our graduate students and undergrad to know how to use skin fold measurements, and then to get like the whole idea, to understand not just the basics, but try to get in consideration and calculation the body fat percentage of the person. And then this will help classify if the person's overweight or obese a little bit more accurate.
Yeah, I'd like to also add a different perspective here, or a similar perspective, in that I like to see BMI as a starting point for when we're communicating and building awareness, as y'all mentioned before, to the masses, to everybody out there, because it's easy to consider how your height and your weight. And then from there, is there room for concern? Do you fall into the area where we may want to dive a little deeper? And then looking at things like body fat percentage and body composition. And then especially if you're underweight, looking at things like bone mineral density with a DEXA scan to see if you're at risk for osteoporosis. Those things come in handy. But I see BMI as a valuable tool when you look at the larger scope of populations and building awareness. But from there, yes, there is room to dive deeper as we look to identifying exactly what the root cause of the concern might be.
So it sounds like from what the three of you are saying that there are some common errors that are happening with these interpretations and even possibly leading to stigma. Can you guys explain or expand on that anymore when it comes to understanding what obesity is?
Yeah. So if you look at the BMI and mortality risk curve, you can see like I mentioned before, it has like a J-shaped kind of curve, which means if you go towards the leaner or the extremes of leanness, that also increases mortality. And likewise, if you go on the other direction, going towards the more obese end of the curve, then the mortality risk increases again. So there is a risk related to excess of leanness, as well as there is risk related to excess of fatness. And I think our society in general has a tendency to put some perhaps overemphasis on the risks of fatness. And that's perhaps a reflection of the stigma related to obesity. For example, if you compare the risk of a person with a BMI of 17, I would say most people would look to the figure, like of somebody with a BMI of 17. It would say, okay, this person is lean, this person is fit, this person is healthy. Sometimes some people would say, oh, this person is attractive, good looking. So these are the adjectives associated with somebody with a BMI of 17. And as opposing to that, the person with a BMI of 32, probably people would say this person is fat, this person doesn't eat well, this person is unhealthy. and et cetera, et cetera. So you can see a clear distinction of positive adjectives to excess of leanness, and at the same time, a negative adjectives to a person of BMI of 32. But if you plot these two data in the BMI curve, guess who is at higher risk of mortality? It's 17, not 32. I guess this might be a surprise to most people. I think the fact that this is a surprise to people is already an indicative that stigma is everywhere in our society. Whether you know about it or not, I think there is some stigma. And of course, the stigma has a negative impact to people with obesity because it increases the perception that obesity is their fault. It's because whatever, they are lazy, because they're not, they don't have like the moral strength to fix themselves, this kind of thinking that's only bringing more guilt to them, and the feeling of failure that increases frustration, that only decreases the odds of being successful in any treatment that tries to overcome obesity. So it's kind of a vicious circle that the professionals need to learn how to break that. So I think the professionals need to learn what is the stigma, how I can identify that, not use stigma when dealing with patients. And by doing so, increases the chance of success in the treatment.
And I think that's interesting that you point that out. Because I think when we think of obesity, nobody, like you said, we're going to assume the opposite, that the 32 is at a higher risk than the 17%. But as we take a look at that, we also are assuming that obesity is caused by not exercising, being lazy, like you said, and even poor choice in foods. I know everybody emphasizes on not eating a ton of processed foods, but we see that that's really ease of access. Are those the only causes of obesity, or are there other factors that lead towards it?
I would say this is part of the problem. So obesity is incredibly complex. It's a multitude of factors that work together to make people obese, and definitely for different people, the combination of factors is not the same. So you cannot say that everybody gets obese for one single reason. Most certainly, different people becomes obese for different reasons. So I think that only adds even more complexity to the problem. And of course, it all comes down when we look at the physics and from the thermodynamics perspective. Of course, obesity is always going to be caused by eating more energy or more calories than you spend. But that doesn't explain why people become obese. So if you want to understand why people become obese, you need to understand what is making people, or some people, eating more and spend less energy. I think that's the key, like the answer for the question.
I'd like to add an element there, in that obesity. I like the original question about the stigma of obesity. I actually just checked it out to confirm. I have just recently broken, I think, into the BMI of 29 to 30, which would make me obese, I think. But if we could do a flex off right quick, I think you'd see I'm in pretty good shape. And there's a lot more to body composition. This is why I mentioned earlier about BMI being a starting point for looking for causes and concerns for health. When we look at people who are obese plus physically inactive, I would argue that's a major red flag right there. When they're very physically active, we actually see lean body mass as another predictor of mortality in its own right, even independent of obesity. So I think there's a lot more that goes into that conversation. So I applaud Dr. Guy here for handling this conversation, because it is so multifaceted. And there's also a lot of ways, and we probably should do a better job at communicating. There's a lot of ways to interpret obesity and what it means about the health of the individual. When you see the offensive linemen playing for the national championship, especially the tight ends, you wouldn't consider them as a health risk because they aren't. Now, some of the inside linemen maybe sometimes, especially after they get done with football, that's another conversation. But physical activity, and as Dr. Gee just pointed out, the thermodynamics here of calories in, calories out, and how we spend those calories, how we metabolize those calories, that's a crucial conversation that a lot of people aren't having because we're so quick to jump to good and bad, right? When there's so many shades of gray in between.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So then when we start breaking down the different elements of obesity and we talk about types of fat and even the cardiovascular risk, are there different makeups to that? Like, are there different types of fat, whether it be good fat, bad fat? I apologize for not being able to categorize them probably in the proper terminology. And then how does that affect the cardiovascular risk?
Yeah, I think this is a very good point, and I think that complements well what Dr. Dalton was just saying. So yeah, the BMI is definitely a starting point. I was definitely criticizing BMI as a diagnostic tool, but I don't think that the clinicians should just drop BMI. I think BMI has to be measured along with other measurements and body fat percentage, as Stefan just said, using the body fat calipers and determining the body fat percentage is also a very important measurement. But those two, they also don't measure perhaps one of the most important nuances of obesity is the regional body fat distribution. So we can roughly saying categorize body fat into two different types of body fat. One being the subcutaneous body fat, which is the one that stays underneath the skin, like in between the skin and the muscles. That's the one that you can pinch with your fingers. And there's also what we call the central body fat or the visceral body fat. That's the one that grows in between your intestines and your guts, everything in your abdomen. That's the one is more typical in male. So male phenotype is it has a bigger tendency to produce more of these visceral body fats. And that's the one that is more dangerous or increases even more the risk for cardiometabolic disease. So usually the subcutaneous body fat is not as risky as the visceral body fat. And that also explains that there is also a second nuance here. This also explains why obese man has a greater risk of mortality in comparison to obese women. So if you look at the same BMI range, let's say a BMI of 35, the increase in risk in man is considerably greater than the same BMI in women. And one of the reasons is man tends to accumulate more of the visceral body fat.
I love it. The waist to hip ratio scale here, that's one of my favorite tools because everybody can use it. It's with the calipers, we have the concern of skill when it comes to the rater and bias of under or over, even when they are skilled. But with the waist to hip ratio, it's a very powerful monitoring tool, also for monitoring change. One of the biggest indicators of that I'm aware of is the change in BMI over time. If somebody's BMI is dramatically different, either under or over from it where it was 1 or 2 or 3 years ago, that's a bigger indicator than where it is absolutely, so to speak, well, within some range. And it's important for people to monitor their own body mass status, we could say. And BMI is one great way to do that, but the waist to hip ratio scale is another great way. And that's one great way to also rule out some of the health concerns that we were talking about.
I want to kind of take this to the next step. And I know I think we've done a very good job of defining obesity and also getting rid of some of the stigma so that way we all understand it better. I want to talk a little bit now about treatment of obesity and even what some of the stigma is around physical activity and the connection between obesity. What is the treatment that is most recommended for obesity? I'm going to go out on a limb and assume it's exercise.
Yes, indeed. Exercise, without a shadow of a doubt, is a very important component of obesity treatment. Obesity treatment. But I think people usually tend to think about exercise in the wrong way. So this is a bit of my own perspective. So everybody feel free to disagree with me. But I think that people tend to look at exercise as a way to burn calories. And that is too much within the logic of the thermodynamics. So if the problem of obesity is to eat more than you spend, how can you overcome that? Doing the opposite. So spending more than you eat. So I think that's a too simple way, is oversimplifying the problem. Again, obesity is very complex. It has different causes. And I think that approach is oversimplistic and not very helpful. And also, I think that if you think about exercise as a way to simply burn calories, you might lose like the real contribution of exercise for the management of obesity. Let me explain why. So exercise is not very effective to induce body mass loss. That might sound counterintuitive, but like all the studies, they showing that exercise alone leads to something around 2 to 3 kilos body mass loss, which is not very much when you're talking about somebody who's like over 100 kilos. I don't know how would that be in pounds, maybe 250 something. So the thing is, if you overemphasizing the effects of exercise on body mass loss, you might think exercise is not working. If exercise is not working, I would not bother exercising at all. And that's the wrong mentality. I'm going to give you a few numbers. Just let me find them. I'm going to give you a few numbers just so you can have an idea. So first of all, why is exercise so little effective to induce body mass loss? The main reason is exercise, it's difficult. Like if you want to spend some extra, let's say 400 calories with exercise, you need to run about 7-8 kilometers. You need to be running like for nearly 1 hour. It's not easy, especially for people who's not used to run that much. It's not very fit, so it's not something trivial to spend 400 calories. And it's much easier to eat less 400 calories than spending more 400 calories. And also, when you exercise, your body starts to compensate for the energy you're spending. And there's two ways of compensating that energy. One way is to increase your hunger. So you exercise, you spend more calories, great, fantastic. But after the exercise and the hours following the exercise, most people tend to feel more hunger. So they tend to eat more. So the 400 calories that you just spend, it might just be compensated by ingesting some extra calories as well. And there's also a second reason. I'll be quick. A second reason is a little bit sad, because it looks like our body is tricking ourselves. When you start spending more energy with exercise, your body tends to become more economic and spend less energy when you're not exercising. So your body itself, it compensates spending less energy.
Dr. Guy, I think you have a very important point about understanding the difference in physical activity, but it still helps, right? So I still think, it helps based on what you're saying, and there's other contributing factors. But I know, Dr. Dias, they often say that you should aim to take 10,000 steps a day. Can you explain why that's important? It's specifically 10,000. I mean, that's a very specific number, and it sounds humongous.
Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about the history of this 10,000. So back in 1965, have this company in Japan, and then they named this device Mampoke. And then this, if you translate it to English, I mean 10,000 steps meters. So it's almost like a pedometer that you put in your body. And then every time you do a step, when you walk, count the number of steps. So the whole idea was this device to make the Japanese people walk more. But then Mampoke means this 10,000 steps meter. So people start taking this as a reference. They say, wait a minute, I need to walk 10,000 steps a day. And the reality, the idea is good, works. But then recently they had a lot of articles throughout those years, but recently had this meta-analysis that analyzed more than 230,000 participants in 17 studies combined. And then they came up with a good number, an idea, so you can get to this. Why is important to get the 10,000 step, or is that really necessary? So they did a before and after the pandemic. So before the pandemic, the number, if you look at the whole world, a day average about 5,000 steps a day. So average population was about 5,000 steps a day. What do you think happened after the pandemic? This number reduced. So people walk less. Why? A little bit we understand, like we hear now, doing the online environment, there's online education. So opened some doors, but also made harder in the other end. So this increased this problem. So with that, the whole idea of this research was trying to identify what would be the number, and then they saw, based on all those studies with all those people that they analyzed, that if you walk less than 3,867, to be more specific, this was the number they came up, you in the red zone. That means you increase all-cause of mortality and cardiovascular disease mortality. You increase rate. And then as you start getting more active, in this case, just for walking more steps, they came up with the orange zone that would be about 5,000 steps a day. And then the yellow zone, about 7,000 steps a day. And the green zone will be 11,000 steps a day. And then you think it's too much, but then sometimes, and then you think, how do I measure? Because remember, the device was a pedometer, but now pretty much everybody has a phone. And then this already comes automatically pretty much every new phone. And there's several apps free available. As you move, as long as you have your phone with you, this will count your number of steps. And then from there, what do you have? Look, they came up with a good results in conclusion here. If you have an increase, so let's say you're doing this bare minimum, 3,800 or 4,000 steps, it doesn't matter. As long as you increase 500 steps a day, there is a decrease in 7% in the cardiovascular disease and mortality rate. So that's what they come up. This is very good. And then if you increase now 1,000 steps a day, so imagine you're doing 4,000 or 5,000, now you add 1,000 steps more a day, you reduce 15% your all-cause of mortality. So this definitely is something for us to take in consideration and then try to analyze. So if you never had a chance, look at your phone, look at free apps, and then see what is your number right now, and then get that in your mind, and then, okay, let's start getting more active. And then simple solutions for you will be, okay, you come to campus, and then instead of you park in front of the building, you park away from the building, and then you walk, and then you have a couple steps right there, and then back and forth. When you have your lunch break or doing a coffee break, instead of having the coffee with you, you go to the other room or go around the building. So this is simple ways for you to start adding some of those steps. And then again, we're going to talk more, and especially we're going to do more episodes how we get more advanced, but this will be the bare minimum to start.
A key element, correct me if I'm wrong here, Stefan, is the change. Right? The individual change. It's not the absolute number of 10,000 or 11,000. That is a good indicator to go by, but it's not the primary metric. The primary metric would be the change every day in the progress over time. Mm-hmm. And that would be, I believe, also, according to the all-cause mortality, independent of BMI. Is that correct?
Yes, this is independent of BMI. And then this goes in accordance with the Dr. Artioli just said early, yes. So then one thing leads to another.
And if we tell them that they're going to lose a lot of weight by exercising, and they don't, they're going to fall right back off the wagon, because like Dr. Guy said earlier, exercise alone won't cause a lot of weight loss, but exercise alone will improve the physiological makeup of your body composition. You can stay the same weight and improve your lean body mass, and that's the primary storage component for glucose, which is the major concern for prediabetes. So as one of the risk factors of obesity is prediabetes and becoming resistant to insulin's effects. Well, by exercising, even without weight change, we can improve the sensitivity to insulin's effects and how we metabolize glucose, which improves our health. So exercise has a number of different benefits to it that go beyond weight change, although it does augment weight change from nutritional strategies and from daily behaviors like physical activity that Dr. Stefane was referring to earlier with the steps. The total activity throughout the day is going to matter more in the long run when it comes to weight loss because it's more sustainable. You can't exercise hard every single day. You have to eventually recover. But also monitoring that makes you aware of how you're matching your physical activity to your caloric intake. Because if you're not monitoring both and you just exercise, you will start eating more. I promise from experience. Every day that I work out harder, especially on leg day, I eat more. And there's hardly anything I can do about that. But I monitor that and I account for that. And it's important to do so. So when we look at these things and we try to take, what's the simple solution? We'll start by monitoring the bigger factors, the bigger components like calories in and calories out. Then beneath that layer, you can start looking at how much protein, carb, and fat that you take in, and then consider how does that compare to yesterday, right? Typically what I like to do and my go-to strategy here would be to get a recall, like a 3 to 7 day recall of a client's nutritional behaviors, and then start working from there, as opposed to just giving them the calories that they're supposed to take in. I'm looking for that change over time that Stefane was referring to about physical activity, but now with nutrition. I want to see just a little bit less and a little bit of fat, a little bit less of carbohydrate probably, and probably typically a little bit more protein throughout each and every day of next week. And this way I move them toward that goal of the absolute indicator of the 11,000 steps and the however many calories that they're supposed to be taking in.
And then just to add, giving a little spoiler, we're going to have a different episode just talking about nutrition and exercise. So please.
I'll save that then. I'll save the golden nuggets there for the next. Yeah, don't give them everything in one podcast, right?
Right.
Nice.
You guys are getting ahead of me here. So
I saw Heather. I'm sorry. I just want to mention
You're
here.
fine,
I saw the best T-shirt I ever saw in the gym the other day. It said "kind of fit, kind of fat." And I was like, brother, where did you get that shirt? And he told me. Now I've already told everybody. I told him I wouldn't do that. But yeah, so it's online. But that's a great mantra that you're always trying to be a little bit fitter, right, and physically active, and knowing that you're never always going to have abs. I probably don't have abs right now, but just it's a good way a good perspective to take.
I think
kind of fit, kind of fat.
Yeah, I think that one very important bottom line message from what you just said is that physical exercise and exercise itself is not very effective at reducing body mass, but it modulates the negative impact of obesity. So if you're obese and you start exercising, even if you don't lose any weight, any body mass, you still have a very meaningful reduction in your overall risk. So risk of mortality, cardiometabolic risk, and risk for several diseases just by being more active. So the positive effects of exercise on obesity is not necessarily related to weight loss. Of course, if it leads to weight loss, that's even better. But the benefits of exercise, they don't depend on the loss of body mass to happen, to occur. I think that's a very important message that we need to let clear here. Like, do exercise regardless of body weight loss. And there's also one very important thing that if you look at the weight loss programs, so let's imagine obese people going through a weight loss program, and usually they start losing weight very quickly at the beginning, and it's difficult to retain the weight loss. So exercise is not very helpful to induce body mass loss, but it is one of the most important factors that predict the long-term maintenance of the body mass loss that they lost. So if you keep active, it is more likely that you stay with a reduction of what you lost, the weights that you lost.
And I think it's important that you guys pointed that out too, because I think individuals at some stage of whatever process or program that they're going through in treating obesity, they're going to hit challenges and they're going to feel defeated. They're going to hit that brick wall, if you will. So I think it's important that you guys spent some time and pointed those out, so that way individuals are more aware when they're introducing physical activity, even taking a look at the nutrition that they're putting into their bodies. My disclosure for everyone first is, please make sure that as we talk about tips for exercise and even some of these other tips, you are consulting either your doctor or a nutritionist or even a certified personal trainer or sports coach, because safety is the key. And you don't want to be doing anything that could potentially cause more harm than good. So with that being said, Dr. Dias, what are some beginner-friendly exercises that an individual could do to kind of start that fitness journey? Where can they get started? I know we talked about the 10,000 steps a day. So getting up, getting moving, that sounds like step one to me.
Yes. So thank you, Heather, for the question. Very important here is to make sure you consult with a specialist. That would be number one. If you have that option, do it. If you don't have this option, then the basic step will be start moving more, start getting more activity. So how do you do this? Simple step will be start walking more, counting your steps, start walking. If you have any device, any tool, any resource, let's say you have a gym complex, like a gym in your condominium you're developing, then you can start alternating the mode of the exercise. Because one thing, like we mentioned earlier, and then Professor Artioli, this, as you start exercising, your body's going to get adapted, and then it's going to start getting a little bit harder. But now if you change what we call changing the mode, the type of the exercise, you make this adaptation a little bit harder, and then also you don't have problems like overuse that could lead to, let's say, stress fracture for somebody that started listening to me, and then from day one, they start running, let's say, every single day without being prepared. So the whole idea is to start getting more activity. This activity needs to be gradually increased. So that's why a good way will be, if you start walking, then start walking 500 steps more, and then not every single day, but give your body a little bit of time to adjust, to adapt to that. And then this, without creating a spoiler, but you got to do gradually. Why? Because, like Professor Oliver said, you're going to get hungrier. And then if you get more hungry, now means you exercise more, but you eat more. And then you end up being in the same BMI. But again, you have the benefits of exercise, like Dr. Artioli said. So no matter what, doing more exercise is better for you, for health outcomes. But now if you want to do, at the same time that you improve your body composition, you reduce body fat percentage, you lower your BMI, and then also improve your health, then you need to go gradually and create a combination. And then that's why we're going to have more episodes that talk just about nutrition and exercise. But that will be one. And then again, very important for you, you need to find something that you enjoy, because people sometimes they think like me. I know Guilherme and Dalton, we like weightlifting, so you can put us in the gym and then we're going to lift weights. But then maybe Heather's not not too familiarized or doesn't enjoy it as much, but maybe you enjoy riding your bicycle. So that will be the best exercise for you, the one that you enjoy. Why? Because if you have a little bit of pleasure when you're doing, even listen to music, you can do for longer, and then it's not going to be as hard. You don't see this as a punishment. Oh, exercise is good. But now you go back to that old school mentality, no pain, no gain. Understand? So we don't want to do that. We want to do something that you enjoy, and then you can gradually progress. So riding a bike, walking, and if you have a gym, and then you can use, of course, a treadmill, and then going from there. And then we're going to have a different episode that's going to talk about resistance training, exercise. That will be my best subject.
Love it.
Dr. Oliver, I want to kind of take us into the educational side of the institution with our exercise and sports science programs. As I introduced you at the beginning, you are our program director for undergraduate online for the sports and exercise science program, which we do offer at a bachelor's level. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you're currently working on or recently worked on?
Absolutely, and I appreciate Stefan's perspective here, because I'll use that as a segue. That I often view this less like work, more like recess, right? And I think that if we're speaking to an audience here that is looking to overcome obesity, look at it like recreation, and get involved and innovate within the things that you do. Try new things. Do try to take on some new elements of exercise. Like if you're not weightlifting, that's probably where you actually have the most room to grow. Your repertoire of opportunities and activities that you can add into your daily routine. But yes, I often start with this mentality of, what we want to do. Because I tell my students, if you give me want to, then I can teach you to do anything. But first, you got to give me want to, right? And so in our first classes, we look at things like the principles of health and fitness. And I make all of my students, before they even consider measuring somebody else, they measure themselves. And they always apply these principles to themselves. And that's what all of our labs in that class are actually about, is applying these principles to themselves before they try to apply it to somebody else, some distant third party that they think of a case, right? Now they're looking at how Bobby really wants to do this, whether or not he enjoys it, whether or not he actually did it, and whether or not it paid off the way that they thought. And they're often surprised. Even these relatively healthy and fit individuals are often surprised when it comes to the outcomes. Sometimes they don't get quite what they wanted, and then they get something completely different that they didn't expect. So that's the starting approach. That's how we get off on the right foot, so to speak, is that I make the courses about them. And I make these things as personally meaningful as possible. And then throughout the progression of their curriculum, I've standardized the assessments so that it starts by whether or not they can apply these things to themselves, then whether or not they can apply these things to others, then whether or not they can apply these things to others in special cases and conditions. Right. And that would be the typical layers of knowledge anyway. Do we know what? Do we have a basic awareness of what? And then do we know what is generalizable and what is not? And then do we have that conditional knowledge about when to and when not to do these things? For example, another great pro tip I would offer here today, if you're listening to this and you want to take an exercise strategy that you may not have tried yet to overcome obesity, I wouldn't recommend running per se, because biomechanically and musculoskeletally, this could be a problem for people who are obese. Bicycling is better, but also walking at an incline. And then you can vary that incline. That's actually what I do. I'm not a big fan of running. I was in the military for 6 years and only passed 2 PT tests because of the run. I set a battalion record now in push-ups. I want to make that clear. I was very physically fit, but I hated the run. Right. So I walk at an incline, very steep. I max it out at 15. I walk as fast as I can, probably faster than some people are jogging, but you can try the same thing and it's probably going to feel much more comfortable on your joints. Little pro tips like that is exactly why Dr. Dias here is recommending that you see a specialist, because we're aware of these things, and making you aware of these things opens up a whole new universe of ideas. Before you're aware of things like that, you really don't maybe not know what to do. Right. But then when you are aware, that's the most powerful proponent of education right there, because now you can build upon that awareness and you can learn more, deeper, and more precisely about what exactly to do. So yeah, seek out a specialist, even if only for that one consultation. They should give you at least a couple of things that open up your mental model of what health-related fitness is for you. And that's what I try to teach in class.
And I want to take that just a step further, because I know we've been having a really great conversation, but I do want to go back to the educational component, because all three of you are educators and you all educate as it pertains to sports nutrition, exercise science. And Dr. Oliver, I think you gave us a very great insight on what it's like and what's important for you to get across to your students. But for Dr. Guy and Dr. Dias, what is the most important thing that you try to get across to your students when teaching these topics, especially considering that we're seeing a more tech savvy or tech heavy, however way you want to phrase it? I think they're both correct. What does that look like and how has that changed your educational practices and even what you're teaching and seeing going out into the field?
Okay, so I think what I try to show to my students when I speak about obesity is the concepts. So I try to focus on the what science brings in terms of concepts, because the way I believe it works. So if I try not to over focus on the specifics or how to use these two or how to use that too. So what I tend to do is like, these are the tools that you can use. This is what is available for you to use as a professional, and this is what science the concepts that science shows to us. And then how can we, on an individual basis, identify these concepts and apply them to individuals so they can use the best of the tools available for each individual that they are looking after. So I try to focus on science and what concepts the science shows in terms of what to do.
Yes, and this, just to add, is very important, like making the link here with Professor Oliver, because nowadays with the internet craziness that we see, there's a bunch of misinformation, and then sometimes people see this and they say, oh, but I just saw this influencer doing this exercise. Yes, but not for you. So like Professor Oliver said, this might be a good exercise, but doesn't apply for your necessity, for your goals. So having kind of like basic assessment. So that's why even if it's only one time you have a consultation with a specialist, he'll be able to see, and then like Professor Guilherme said, the options that are available and which one will be the best for you. So we need to individualize this. And then going here from, because for many years I did undergrad too, going from undergrad to graduate school, what we need to do them, inform them, and then we have great resources at Keiser, like Keiser Library, so we pull peer review articles, and then now like we see, okay, this YouTuber or influencer is talking about this, let's see what the science telling us, like Guilherme said, and then we read, and then we compare, and then what I tell, and then what I do, and then I tell to my students, you gotta go and apply. So it's not because just you saw this in an article, peer review article, or publication that really works for everybody. So now you go in the gym and then try this, and then you give us feedback. And it was like, oh, they have research, for example, that did 20 sets for one muscle group. I was like, okay, I already did that. Have you tried? And they say, no. I say, so do it. Next time they come, they can barely walk, like, yep. And then you see, now you understand, 20 sets of back squat for an article might be good, but when you're doing the actual live, and then you have to come to work the next day, and then you start seeing this, and then you get the theory and the practical experience, and then when you put together, then you really learn. So that's what we're trying to do here at Keiser, and then having like guests like Guilherme and Dr. Artioli, they're very knowledgeable, just enhance to that, and then that's the whole idea that we're trying to move forward in the future.
Absolutely. And I want to point out the wisdom here in those research articles and the researchers who are doing those experiments. They didn't just say the things that are on the page. They did several other things, and they thought about many other things that they did not include on that page. Wisdom is about all things that maybe we don't say sometimes. And the positioning of that 20 back squats within the context of whatever that study was about. Every word in a scientific manuscript is thoughtfully chosen. And too many of us just try to regurgitate. Even in research, we try to regurgitate the things that have been done without a proper understanding and appreciation of what went on behind the scenes and between every line of that manuscript. So yes, I love Stefane's, Dr. Dias's perspective here. And I hope the students get the opportunity to replicate these things in my classes and his classes, because then they truly see and appreciate what goes on here, and also in communicating this knowledge to others.
Dr. Oliver, you're in a unique standpoint right now with the bachelor's program for online students, where you're developing and really breaking down and taking a look at the course offerings for this program. Has the delivery method in which you are teaching, which is online, affected how you are developing those courses?
Absolutely.
With their content, I should say?
Yes. Okay. So I remind my students on day one, and my colleagues, I teach online accelerated 4-week courses in exercise. That's the hardest way to do this. Plus, most of my students work asynchronously. So they rarely ever actually interact with me. I have to think through all of the faults that and missteps and mistakes that they could make in advance. So it's been a challenge. to teach these things to students that sometimes I never see, and in this accelerated manner. Luckily, they only take one course at a time. So we can really hone in and dial in on that one particular lens, I like to say. Each textbook I look at and each course I look at kind of like a lens, like a motor behavior lens, right? And we explore the concepts that Dr. Guy was talking about here, like with motor learning. And then I differentiate motor learning from motor control. And then look at the types of questions we might investigate with each lens. And then we start looking at maybe the technological tools that we could use to monitor and measure these things. And then when I feel like the students are good at measuring and evaluating these things, I feel like they have a very good, much better grasp when they can differentiate between those lenses and then start analyzing these problems that we see in real world practice so they can better appreciate what goes into forming a real targeted solution. But yes, it's with the face-to-face environment, hopefully the students are really engaging their professors, because still, even today, even with AI, right now I'm looking at a pilot project on AI in the classroom. And I still have, this is a little self-serving, but the professor in the classroom is still your best resource. Because again, the wisdom there, the stuff that we're explaining to the students, we're providing to those students, especially during the one-to-one conversation. We're giving the students only what they need. When a student gives a presentation in my class, I remind them, put the audience first. This is about them, not you. You need to tell the audience what they need to know, not everything you know, right? In order to answer the research question. We do the same thing, believe it or not, with all of our students. We think, what does this student need to know? If I was a doctor of anything, it would be diagnosing knowledge gaps. I worked down the student's audit trail and I looked at what information are they lacking. When they tell me that peanut butter burns fat, I don't say you're wrong. I worked down that audit trail of how they came to that conclusion to see what information they need. And it's a very iterative process, and it's a very interactive, dynamic process. So I really do encourage my students online to meet with me every chance they get. I give them my cell phone number. I text them whenever it's a timely thing. I make sure that they engage me in every way they know possible, because when they have that content in front of them, sometimes they do make the wrong sense of it. And that's where we come in handy, is we're making sense of these things and applying to the real world. So it has been a challenge to teach these things online, and I'm always open to ideas for this. But it's also been very rewarding because we can reach many other students. I've got so many students in the military right now. It's heartwarming because I was in the military for 6 years. I understand. I appreciate everything they do, and I have walked in those boots literally. And I also know the stressors. I had to drop out of Auburn 3 times for mobilization. And one time I had to give my dog to my best friend, and I couldn't even say goodbye to my mom. I had 48 hours to report. But so those students are what I think about when I think about the grading and the feedback and the interaction. And sometimes when I don't see them for 4 or 5 days, that's when I reach out to them and make sure that they're still engaged, because there are so many distractors. There's a pro and a con today in that everything is so convenient, but that's also the problem. Everything is so convenient. It's just like working out at home. You can get weights right here at your house, but you also have the TV and the couch right there, right? So sometimes there's a lot of advances in techniques and tools, a lot of tools, so many tools in technology to get these things done. But I'm always reiterating the core concept and principle of these things to the students.
And as we wrap up this episode, because I think I've taken up enough of your gentlemen's time, Dr. Dias, let's say somebody is listening to this podcast. Maybe they're already enrolled in one of your programs. Maybe that's one of Dr. Guy's students in Brazil or a future student of Dr. Oliver's. What are some of the job opportunities? I think we've established that academia is a big one with the 3 of you here today with research and teaching and sharing of knowledge. But what are some other opportunities that students or future students can expect?
Yes, great question. Thank you. So if you do a quick search in one of those job searching tools, I'm not going to say the name, but I pulled this morning, and then you had about 600 jobs as an exercise physiologist. So you put exercise physiologist, you're going to find 600 jobs just in the United States. I'm not talking about Brazil. I'm not talking about the rest of the world. So that means there's a lot of jobs there. And then why do you think is this opportunity to move forward this ladder and then go into graduate school? Because I put jobs that are paying $65,000 or more, and then you still got 600 jobs available. So that means you have opportunities there to make a decent amount of money. And then what do you need? You had, because, but I'm in a bachelor's with Professor Oliver. You still have the opportunity to become an exercise physiologist, but sometimes if you look at the requirements, they're going to ask you more years of experience. So you still get it. But now the preferred, if you look at the word prefer, and then you're going to see master's degree preferred. So that means going eating with a bachelor's and then getting, of course, certifications that we prepare you for during this program since the undergrad, or going straight to a master's degree. So that means right now we have 600 plus jobs just for one searching tool that pay more than $60,000 in the United States. So that means this is a good opportunity, something if you never thought about it, now you can. Plus, I didn't search for personal training. I didn't search for exercise specialist, and then the list just goes on and on. So there's a lot of opportunities there. Definitely something that we all passionate about it. Us three here, I can say for sure, we've been in the field for many years, and then we can guide you. And then also feel free to network with Professor Artioli. He's like a very knowledgeable, and then appreciate him coming here. And then Dalton, my colleague. So this is the first one of a series that we're gonna do. So definitely, I'm glad to be here, Heather.
So I want to say thank you to all three of you, Dr. Guy, Dr. Oliver, and Dr. Dias, for taking the time to talk to us today about obesity and physical activity and the great insights you provide. And especially you, Dr. Guy, for connecting with us all the way from Brazil to have this conversation. We are very grateful for that.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. And if you guys have enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to like, subscribe, and follow the Keiser Voices podcast as we continue our conversation this month, breaking down sports exercise science and the different components that our students get to learn about while they are in this program. So thank you all again, and we hope to catch you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for journeying with us today on Keiser Voices, the story of success. As we close this chapter, remember, every story has its next page.